Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now about the turnaround of this franchise, kind of taking it through the snapshot of three different things. Dan Quinn, of course, but also kind of going inside his meetings, what they're like. They're different, they're unique, but what it says about him and why it has laid the groundwork for this franchise and the signings of Ertz and Wagner, some specific anecdotes about like just little things they do that rub off on others, and of course, Jaden Daniels. So anyways, that's up on ESPN.com right now. And for you Gold members, remember Thursday night, 7:30 Eastern Time, private Zoom. So in a minute, I'm going to be joined by former Washington Redskin offensive lineman Jon Jansen. He is a sports talk show host in Detroit. That's why I want to bring him on. He, of course, played for the Redskins, also finished his career in Detroit. I felt like he would have a very good perspective on this matchup, on the Lions, and on just things in general, and just, the changing of culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one warning here, folks. I had to do this by audio. I had two choices here. I could either, Jansen was very gracious with his time with me. I go back a long ways with him, of course. We have a good relationship. Love talking to him. Always been one of my favorites. A very busy week, but he wanted to carve out time. The only way he could do it, though, was while being on the phone while driving. And so that means no video, unfortunately. But it's a really good interview because Jon is really good and insightful. A lot of stuff he talks about Jaden Daniels. He still watches this franchise. I think this place still means something to him. So he pays attention to them, and he pays attention to Jaden Daniels in particular, just because of what he means for the future here. And I think here's a guy who's played for two teams that had some that, have a deep history and haven't been very good until Lions a couple years ago, and now Washington now. So been an interesting period for him. But again, does sports talk show in Detroit, and I was pleased to have him on. But my options were only do video with somebody else, or bring Jon Jansen on and just do it audio, and hopefully that you will want to watch or at least listen while you're doing whatever with the show on. So if you're listening on podcast, your headphones, you're good to go. Anyways, so that aside, that's why there's no video here, but the choice was either yes with audio or nothing at all. And I choose yes with audio because it's way better than nothing at all. So stay tuned for that in a minute. I got a couple things to go over here for a couple minutes, and then I'll get to that. So today was Wednesday. It's like a regular, basically, I'll be honest, folks, these days screw me up because we operate by an NFL schedule. And so when their Wednesday practice was on Tuesday, so I keep feeling like today is Thursday, but it's actually Wednesday but they're doing their Thursday practice because the game is Saturday. So tomorrow is Thursday, but it's a regular Friday practice for them. You got it? And so you get a little bit mixed up. But anyways, today was a regular Thursday type practice that happened to be held on a Wednesday. So on the injury report, Bobby Wagner still there, did not practice again because of an ankle injury. I don't know really how bad it is. We haven't had a chance to talk to him yet. What I do know is that he was doing stuff. They practiced in the bubble today. It was cold and windy outside. The wind is a big factor here. When it's windy, it's hard to get good work done. And that's why they go in the bubble. When you're in the bubble, it's hard, though, because it's only one field. So there are certain things it's hard to do. Anyways, so before practice really gets going, the first thing to do is after stretching is special team stuff. And during that time, like quarterbacks are throwing into the nets. So videos you see of thrown in the nets, that's when that's occurring. Like I put up video on here of Terry McLaurin catching some passes, just like some of his pre-practice routine, catching passes over the shoulder. Like you practice that stuff and it matters. So that's up actually on the shorts page on Ampire Media. So, and during this time, I'm watching Bobby Wagner over on the other side. He's working with John Allen, just doing some defensive drills. So it looks like he was doing stuff. It wasn't like he was just standing around. He was definitely doing stuff. I think you just want to make sure that guy's right. I'd be shocked if the guy didn't play. So I would almost say there's no chance, but I don't know that for sure. But we know he's been a DNP for practice. We also know the kind of guy he is, what this game means, what he means to the team, so I would say put your money on him. But anyways, so there you go. That's the big one on that list. Now, the other thing today we talked to the coordinator. So we talked to Cliff Kingsbury. First, we talked to Joe Witt. And then we talked to Cliff Kingsbury. So let's get a couple things with Joe Witt. Now, his name has been attached to the New York Jets job. Kingsbury's name has come up with the Saints and Bears. And so don't know really where they're at, where that's at. What I do know is neither guy wants to talk about it at this point, which is great. Like the question's going to get asked because it gets public. It's public out there. So I get the first question. So I ask the question just to get it over with because you know it's going to come up and it's out there. And it gives them a chance to say, I'm only going to focus on Detroit, which is exactly what Joe Witt said. And his quote was, my whole focus is on, well, not the whole quote, but part of the quote was, whole focus is on Detroit. Anything else, and I'm cheating these young men. So that's where their focus is. Now, I don't know that I don't know if that means he's going to interview or not. I don't know. Um, it could be that they wait until afterwards. I don't know. And the same thing with Kingsbury. It would make I think this is what happens when you have success. You get guys, these coaches open the eyes of other people and you get chances. And I think it's a good opportunity for him to get his name out there, if nothing else, for the future. Um, I think Joe Witt has done a good job, but I also think he's a strong leader. And there's a lot that I like about him, the way he conducts himself, how his approach, what he says. And I think the good thing is it's like sometimes what guys say here is not how they say it here. And so like what you hear back here, behind the scenes is more about very similar to what he says in front of us. That's a good quality. Anyways, I'm going to get into more of some of the defensive stuff on the five things I think, so I'll go over some of that there. But that was the big thing is because his name was out there, but they're not letting it become a focus. I think that's very smart. Kingsbury, same thing. And I think that's a good way to go. And one of the things, too, he also talked about Marshawn Lattimore. And I said this after the game, and I think it was Bram and I, or Craig Hoffman and I were talking about this. Lattimore did not look right. And not that he looked injured, but he didn't look like himself. Like when I watch him on film, when he's right, you see a different player. And I didn't see that guy on Sunday night. And one thing and I think this is, it certainly felt like the layoff. I mean, the guy's had played only 2 games since late October. So, and what Lattimore, excuse me, what Quinn said is they felt like because he only had 1 day of real practice leading into that game, he came back a little bit, and then just you had that, and then they gave him the Friday off. So you're really working through a lot by doing that. So you would hope he would be better this week, and I think so. That's something to watch, but it's not to provide excuses. I think that's a real thing. Like he did not look like he had a rhythm as a corner, or he did not play with the same um, maybe I don't know, not necessarily confidence, but he just looked different. He was sometimes a little bit off balance, that kind of stuff. So I think getting a full week in there will be a huge benefit for him. And it's funny because the last thing too is in those 2-minute situations or last game, somebody asked Witt what he's thinking. He's like, what he's thinking is get the ball back, we're going to win. Actually, and I'll get into more of that in the five things I think with what one other player told me about that situation after the defense gave up a game tying field goal. Anyways, as far as Kingsbury goes, again, not addressing the rumors, so we don't even get there. He talked about Dyami Brown and just how he feels like his um, attitude and approach is more businesslike, and it's become more businesslike throughout the season. And I even asked Dyami about that, like what he thought about that, and he felt like what he has done better is working on his footwork on the routes, et cetera. And so, in the fact that one of the things that Kingsbury said that his route technique and fundamentals have improved. And the more that approach changed, the more you saw it on the field. And I think again, you credit the footwork for a lot of that, and that's partly why Brown is having a better year. But again, approach and attitude, it makes a tremendous difference. So, and he also talked about like the late game situations. I mean, we asked Dan Quinn about the other day, asked Jaden Daniels about the other day. Those guys seem to really embrace, like Dan Quinn is all fight about it. I love it. But Dan Quinn's the kind of guy that embraces whatever the situation is. If it's adversity, he's going to embrace it. Like he used he used his losses to say like, okay, how are we going to react, right? How are we going to come back from this? He's not he doesn't want to lose, but you embrace the situation you're in to see what do you do with it. It's almost like for him, each of those tests become an opportunity to show, hey, let's see more of what you're made of. And I think he does a good job with that. Jaden Daniels embraces it because he's a competitor. He likes being in those situations. He loves having the ball in those spots. Somebody asked Cliff Kingsbury what he thinks of it. He goes, I'm getting a tighter fade on his haircut to hide the gray hairs. He goes, I do not love it. Now, what he does say is he goes, you always feel like you have a chance, especially with Jaden Daniels at quarterback. But it is a little bit different for Kingsbury than it is for Quinn, because Kingsbury is the one who's got to call the right plays at the right times to get these points. Whereas Quinn, he just, I mean, what Quinn might do is one of the things he might do, and Kingsbury talked about this today too, is when they want to run the ball, he's going to remind them like, hey, let's run the ball here. And one thing Kingsbury said, because he kind of laughed, he's like, it was up to him sometimes. You would be throwing the ball all over the place. But he said that Quinn has helped him understand the importance of the run game, not just to them, but to the defense as well. And so, I think that's a good thing. I think what it also shows is that there's not a lot of ego, I think, with Kingsbury. And I think that's a good thing. In fact, this is the other part of that. Like, he's willing to admit certain times, like, hey, this play was not the most dynamic play. It's just that you have the players work. And that's where it goes to those late game situations and even key situations like fourth down plays. And his comment was, it's players, not plays. And he even pointed out there was I think it was a 4th and 5 pass to Zach Ertz. He's like, that was a basic day one install, but they wanted to get the ball to Zach Ertz. That's who they trusted in that situation. So, like I said, it's players, not plays. And that's why, we get caught up in schemes and all that. Detroit has a wonderful scheme, but man, those players make it work, and that's always the key. So, anyways, that's a lot of what went on today. Just wanted to fill you on that before I get to my conversation with Jon Jansen. So let's get to my conversation with former Washington Redskin offensive lineman turned Detroit sports talk show host and former Detroit Lion with some insight into the Lions and also his thoughts on Jaden Daniels. Well, always happy to be joined by Jon Jansen. And, in November, I think this conversation would have been different. Now it'd be a little bit different. So we're not going to even go there. We don't have to, do we? But because there's a bigger game for this conversation happening on Saturday. And you played here, obviously. You grew up in Michigan. You watch the Lions and all that. What's it like for you for this game? Like, what are your emotions like watching or getting ready for this game?
Well, it's obviously I'm in a unique situation because I played for both franchises.
Right.
I spent a decade there, and now I do, for 4 hours every morning. I do sports talk in Detroit, and I've got a relationship with Dan Campbell and Mark Brunell is our quarterback coach, Antoine Randall L. Hank, who was, Hank Fraley, the O-line coach, who was with the Eagles there for a long time, and so it's very unique and for the fans in Washington, I'm excited for them because I know how much it means to be back in the playoffs, to have a win in the playoffs. And it's just, I'm so excited for the fan base to be able to enjoy those moments. My feelings about the franchise are they're fairly mixed, right? I was there for a decade and I loved it, but we never won, and it was always constant turnover and change. And then obviously when you're released, it never ends well. And I still have emotions about that, but just from the football side of things, it's really fun to watch both of these teams that are going to face off at Ford Field on Saturday night, because Jaden Daniels and this offense has brought excitement. He's brought hope, and 12 wins as a rookie, now 13. It's impressive, and the future looks amazing. And they really feel like they are the Lions from about a year and a half ago. So last year they made the playoffs for the first time in forever. Had a first playoff win in 30 years for the Lions, but I don't know that Washington is quite there yet, but they're further ahead, obviously, of where the Lions were a couple of years ago when they just missed out on the playoffs. So I'm really excited about where the Washington franchise is in the development with Dan Quinn and that bunch of guys, because I know how exciting the next few years can be for them.
It's funny you say that, because I kind of view it a lot of the same way, and it's partly because I think there's some similarities between Dan Campbell and Dan Quinn, not exactly the same person, but how they came in and changed a culture around. And that's not an easy thing to do. How did Dan Campbell do it?
Well, I always refer back to things that I knew as a player, things that I experienced, and I've already talked about Marty, so I'll just go ahead and go down that road again. Dan reminds me a lot of Marty in regards to, you may not like what he has to say about you or about anything that's going on from a player's perspective, but he is going to be 100% honest with you. And that's really hard to do. Now, I don't know Dan Quinn well enough to know if that's his personality with the team, but I know for Dan Campbell, it's like there's a hard line. There's a right, there's a wrong. There's no gray. It's all, there's white and there's black. And in terms of right and wrong. And so it's when, as a player, when you know exactly where you stand with the coach, with the organization, and you understand what the expectations are for me to make this team. What are the expectations when we go to game 1, to game 8, game 10, all the way down the line to the playoffs? And if even getting into more of the minutia, you know what to expect when it's 4th and short. Right. And so there's nothing left to question. Everything has an answer, and you know it before you even walk in the office or before you walk in the meeting room. And there's great relief, and there's just a great feeling of knowing every time I go to the office, every time I step on the field, I know what I have to do to be successful today. And that's what Dan has brought in. You brought up that word culture. Yeah. That is such a hard thing to change or to even address with a franchise. And hell, I mean, when I was there, it was 6 coaches in 10 years. And every one of them said, we're going to change the culture. We're going to work on the culture. It's one of those hot button words that when somebody takes a job, they feel like they have to say it. But it's the only thing that will turn a franchise from a loser to a winner, or from a franchise that's just, kind of in the middle of nowhere. They're in purgatory. Yeah. It's the only thing that will get you right.
It's funny because, again, there are very strong similarities between Quinn and Campbell, and they may do some things differently or come across, but the Quinn is very honest with his guys as well. And guys like playing for people who are honest with them. And you may not always like it, but you know where you stand. And I think that's a tremendous difference here. But it's also, John, like, you get the right veterans in a place, you get the right coaches around you. I think that makes a huge difference too, don't you?
Well, when the culture is going to be set by leadership, and that whether anybody wants to know it or believe it or feel it or not, it does start with ownership. And there needs to be a clear line of respect for the owner and a respect for the process. And I got to believe that Quinn is much like Dan, where, hey, if you've got an issue, I'm going to shoot you straight. If you have an issue, then you come to me. You either go to your position coach, you come to me. You're not going to the general manager. You're not going to the owner. And the owners can't allow that. They unless there's an extreme circumstance, but on a day-to-day basis, that's not going to be the case. So there's got to be a respect of the chain of command. And I think that both organizations right now, and I know in Detroit with Sheila at the top, Brad Holmes, Rod Wood in the front office, Spielman in the front office, but certainly with Dan, there's a definite chain of command and a definite way that you go about doing things.
I'm glad you brought up Spielman to add some Buckeye flavor to that place up there.
Hey, we love Big Ten guys. We love them.
Hey, listen, Big Ten's on a roll, baby. But you go with the Lions too on the field. What's been the biggest change you've seen? I mean, let's start with the offense, because that offensive line is tremendous. The quarterback is really good. There's good skill players, a really good play caller. What's the big thing that jumps out to you about their offense?
It's variety. It's consistency, and Jared Goff he's played every game in the last 3 years. You can't be more consistent than that. And it's Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, all the way down to Hank as the O-line coach. Like, all of these guys are on the same page, and then you start putting together and you start building. And when Brad Holmes got here, what's the first thing he did? He traded for Jared Goff because his timeline matched up better than Matthew Stafford's. The Lions right now, they are just getting into the sweet spot. And Jared Goff he's a veteran quarterback, but he's still young enough. I mean, he could still play for another decade, where Matthew Stafford, he doesn't have a decade in him. So he set the course by getting the quarterback, much like it appears Washington has done with Jaden Daniels. And then you've got to go out there and solidify the offensive line. His first draft pick, Penei Sewell, might be the best offensive lineman in the NFL right now. And if he's not, he's definitely top 2 or 3 and will be there within a year or two. So that's where you set it. Frank Ragnow was already here. He's an all-pro center. Taylor Decker, your Buckeye. He's been a guy that's been very consistent. Graham Glasgow, my Michigan man, at left guard, brought him back. Kevin Zeitler, when you lose Jonah Jackson in free agency, you go get an experienced offensive lineman at Kevin Zeitler from the Ravens, and now you've got an offensive line that could protect your most important asset, that's your quarterback. And then you start adding David Montgomery in free agency from the Bears, Jahmyr Gibbs. Amon-Ra St. Brown was in that first draft that Brad Holmes had. Jameson Williams, you show a little patience. You draft a guy that is, dinged up, but he's got a huge upside, and there's not much gamble because ACLs get repaired. That's how they built the offense. And then you start, okay, well, how do we build the defense? Same as the offense. You've got to build up front. You draft Aiden Hutchinson. You've got Aleem McNeil. He was one of those first round, draft picks. You've got to be able to build in the trenches, offensive and defensive lines, because that's where games are ultimately going to be won, especially when you get to this time of the year. You got to be able to win in the trenches. Look at Philly. They're always a good team because they concentrate on when somebody goes down up front or somebody retires like Kelsey, hey, boom, they've got somebody waiting in the wings ready to go. That's the success. That's how you maintain excellence over a number of years, instead of just being we had a sweet year this year. What are we going to do next year? Have no idea because we got to rebuild our fronts.
For sure. And then watching what Ben Johnson does as a play caller, what jumps out at you with him?
Well, it's interesting because Ben Johnson does a great job of calling a game. And everybody's going to get, and he deserves all the credit in the world. This offense is Dan Campbell's offense. He brought it from Sean Payton. And in year one, Anthony Lynn was the offensive coordinator, wasn't working out, wasn't understanding how Dan Campbell wanted this offense called. And Ben Johnson, ironically, was a Patricia guy. He was already here, and Dan held him over as a tight ends coach and then promoted him. And as soon as that first season ended and Dan was calling plays at the end, he promotes Ben Johnson to offensive coordinator. And it's a collaborative effort where everybody's got a voice putting together the game plan. And they talk about it all week. They're watching film. Game days, it's ultimately up to Ben to call the plays. And I think he does a really nice job of being creative and setting things up. There are some guys that just have that knack. Norv Turner, as a play caller, had that knack of, here's what I'm going to be doing on first and second down early in the game, because on first and second down, late in the second quarter or third or fourth quarter, I want to give this same look, but here's the play set that I want to call at that time. And they just have that feel for when to stick with something. They're always setting something up, and when to flip the switch to go to plan B, plan C, plan D, all the way through the alphabet. And I think Ben Johnson does a great job, and he's going to be a head coach probably after this season. But there's a lot of people that are worried about losing them. I'm not necessarily in that group because you got to identify talent on the field. You got to identify talent on the coaching staff. This is ultimately Dan Campbell's offense, and he's going to be able to find somebody that's going to call it the way he wants it called.
So two more on the offense. Jahmyr Gibbs, like what has he meant to the offense? And also what I've noticed, and tell me if I'm wrong, sometimes with him, they're taking wider splits on the line. What is the result of all of that? But just his impact and just, am I right on seeing it that way?
Well, yeah, I mean, his impact is unbelievable. Like the Lions have, 14 explosive plays from the running game throughout the course of this regular season. Jahmyr Gibbs has 13 of them. Like, I mean, he's a guy, and the reason that you take those big splits is not necessarily because it offers more for the offense. That's a byproduct. The reason you take those big splits is because when that play says, hey, I got to get to the 6 or the 8, or I got to, this is wide. Damn it, I need a head start on this running back because he's so damn quick. And you've got to be able to get there and get that stretch. And so that's a big reason why those splits are the way they are.
And then when Detroit's offense gets slowed, and I don't know how, it's not that it happens very often. What happens? Like, what is it that could slow them at all?
You stop the running game. Everything is predicated on the run, and I mean, they run the ball 51% of the time. And I don't know of another offense. In fact, I'm not sure when the last offense that operated in the NFL that ran it more than they threw. It's a passing league, but this is a team that it all starts with the run. And then off of that, you've got your play action pass for offensive linemen. By all intents and purposes, that's still a run.
Right.
I get to be aggressive. So 75% of the time, as an offensive lineman, I am firing off the ball. I get to be aggressive. I get to be the one that dictates the tempo, that dictates the how this play is going to be run, and I get to hit you in the freaking mouth every single time. It is an absolute lineman's dream. So that's where this offense has to find success. And I know obviously against Washington, they're number 30 against the run,
Right.
which is surprising to me. And I'll ask you this, when you've got Jonathan Allen and you've got Deron Payne in there, like, why have they struggled against the run, especially with Bobby Wagner at linebacker? I don't get it.
I don't always get it either. And sometimes the gap discipline isn't always there. Sometimes it's, it's honestly, John, it's confusing because, and John Allen missed a lot of time. That was part of it, but they weren't doing well before he got hurt early in the year either. And I think some of that was getting used to the offense. Sometimes it's maybe a guy ducking under a block and creating a wider gap, but it's been very confusing. I also think that sometimes too, I think they're more afraid of giving up the explosive pass play than they are the run. So I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, so if they're going to slow down this offense, they're going to have to find a way to stop the run. And now that David Montgomery is back, it makes it just that much harder. And you got both those guys in the backfield. You've got a tight end in Laporta that can set the edge and block, and and with Brock out there as well. That's really where this offense becomes very difficult to defend. And then you start thinking about the pass game, and you've got J-Mo that is one of the fastest players in the NFL and can hit a home run every time he touches the ball. Amon-Ra St. Brown, there might not be a more reliable receiver in the NFL than Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the relationship and the chemistry that he has with Goff. You throw Tim Patrick in there and Laporta in the pass game. At every single level, this offense, like I just said, when Brad Holmes came in, he started with Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, J-Mo in year two. Like, he has built this offense to outscore anybody that they face.
So, and by the way, the one other thing, I think they need maybe more to find a defensive end who can use an equal threat against the run and the pass, because they have some guys who do one well and not the other. And I think that also kind of it allows the offense maybe to go around that too sometimes. On defense, for the Lions, like a lot of injuries. What's the concern there for Detroit this weekend?
Well, it's just going to be, being able to handle the dual threat that Jaden Daniels is, and everybody, if there was a defensive coordinator that had a perfect game plan for a mobile quarterback, like he would be the most sought after individual in all of football, because that's the way that offenses in the NFL and certainly in college are going. Hold on, my son wants to chime in as well, because he is worried about Jaden Daniels too, and that's going to be the big issue for this defense. Your leading rusher is your quarterback, and I know that Robinson in the backfield, like, he's a threat, but when you can run from that quarterback position, it's a threat, because you can't necessarily be aggressive in pass rush, because you don't want to break down you don't want to create a rush lane and an exit route for them. And when they run the read option or they run the option, it's not going to work every time. Yeah, there's going to be times where the defense can stop it, but the threat is constantly there. And to have that athletic ability, and as that's why I'm so excited for the Washington fans, because when you've got a quarterback with the skill set of Jaden Daniels, you can literally go into any game, and I don't care if he's a rookie, he's going to be better every single year, but you got a chance to win every game, because it's almost impossible to limit or stop a quarterback with that skill set.
For sure. And I think that's why this team feels comfortable. And I know that any team does not want to face him for that reason. Detroit's the pass rush and the pass coverage, the impact of some of the injuries in the secondary, but also Aiden Hutchinson. How concerned is Detroit which should Detroit be with that pass defense against this offense?
Well, I mean, the whole key is going to be to get up early and force Jaden Daniels to have to throw the ball nearly every time. Put pressure on him. See how he handles the pressure. But if they don't, now all of a sudden, without Carlton Davis in the secondary, because Dan has already said he's not going to be back, and they're going to get back Terrion Arnold for this game. Branch is an absolute stud in the secondary. Yes. But if any of them go down or any of them get nicked up, that's really where there's just no reinforcements. So the starting 11 will be able to hold their own, as we saw at the end of the season against Minnesota and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. But as soon as Terrion Arnold went down in that game, everybody was holding their breath, because that's the weak link. That's where they went in the offseason, drafted Terrion Arnold, got Amik Robertson, Carlton Davis, and Brian Branch in his second year. Like, that's where they made the big improvement, and now a lot of those guys are unavailable.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's hard. What I've been amazed by is they lost a lot of key guys in that defense, including, again, Hutchinson is a really, really good player, and not just a good player, but seemed to be a heartbeat of the defense too. And but is the pass rush a concern here?
Pass rush is a huge concern. And they lost Hutch. What was it, week 5? Yeah. Week 4, week 5, had 7.5 sacks, still leads the team in sacks. And that'll kind of show you. And then they lose Aleem McNeil later in the season, who was having a Pro Bowl caliber season, just signed a new deal. Yeah, I know. That's what they got to say to Jaden when they rush him. That's right. But there's just so much that goes into creating that pass rush. And for Aaron Glenn, it's now become, where are they going to bring the blitz from? Ife Melifonwu is finally healthy, and that's been a nice addition to this defense. Last year, at the end of the year, it was about blitzing the quarterback and different blitzes, different looks after the snap. That's really what they're going to have to do, is try and confuse Jaden Daniels, because the look before the snap and the look after the snap have to be completely different. You've got to make him think. When he is just able to go out there and be a player, he's as good as they come. So it's the look after the snap. Where's the blitz coming from? What's the coverage? And, can you make him hold on to that ball for a split second longer so that you can just get a hit on him? We're not even talking about sacks. We're just talking about a hit. And can you rush him enough to make a bad decision and give you the ball one or two times? It's not going to be wins up front. They went and got Zadarius Smith from the Browns, and he's got good experience, but he's not a premier pass rusher. He's not going to win one-on-one. At least you can't count it. Sometimes he will, but you just don't have a guy up front that has that presence of a Hutch or an Aleem McNeil that's going to be able to apply pressure when you need it most.
The last thing, I'm going to give you a chance to brag on one of your alums here. Mike Samerstill's had a really good year for Washington. Any surprise, and what are your thoughts on Mike Samerstill?
Not at all. I'm not surprised. It's been fun to watch him grow in that defense. I wish he wouldn't have got stiff-armed last weekend, or try to knock down a stiff arm. Just make the tackle, Mikey. But it's, there's going to be moments like that where you're a rookie, and there's going to be moments that hey, those guys are getting paid too. They're good and they're going to happen. But Mikey's been very consistent, and we started this conversation by talking about leadership from the ownership, from the general manager, from the coach, and ultimately you've got to have leadership from the players. And I think this past draft for Washington could prove to be a franchise altering, not just because you got your franchise quarterback, but it looks like Jaden Daniels, the leader on offense, and Mikey Samerstill. I'm telling you right now, in year 2, year 3, year 4, I guarantee you he's going to be wearing that C. He did it for 2 years at Michigan, and he's going to be doing it again. And that, what you see on the field, it's a great value add, but what you get in the offseason, what you get in the locker room, what you get in the meeting rooms, it's going to be it's going to be something that people might not see or might not be aware of. But man, oh man, he's a tremendous leader.
He is, and I always say this: like what stood out to me is what a really good competitor he is. Switch from inside to outside, and he's going up against guys bigger than him. He does not back down. He's just a fun football player to watch. And I know that pains me to say that a little bit.
No, I know, and I don't want. I hate our conversation to end, but I think my son might be leaving a Buckeye in his pants, and so I might have to go change that. Which we know what that smells like and looks like. So, hey, all I have to say about that is, you mentioned, hey, good for the Big Ten, and yeah, just don't let the Big Ten down there, little fella. Just come through for the Big Ten. It's one game.
Yeah.
I know it's an important one, and it might be really hard for Ryan Day, but come on, man, let's go.
I'm with you there. So we're on the same boat there. It'd be kind of nice to, so, and it's nice that one team is still playing. So, all right, man, I appreciate your time as always. I love talking to you, and I miss talking to you here. So I always tell people you've always been one of my favorite people to talk to and deal with over the years. So,
hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And you know what? I'm looking forward to seeing as many people as I possibly can when Washington comes to town, and it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun.
Are you going to be at the game?
I will not.
Oh,
okay. I'm at the point in my life, especially with 5 kids, where I'm just hoping to be in front of the TV by 8:00 on Saturday night.
There you go. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Have a good one.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Jon Jansen for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back with another episode on Friday with my 5 things I think, getting you ready for the game Saturday night against the Detroit Lions.